well, here he is, friend of the podcast now, David Rocklin, out with novel number 3 very soon. David, how are you doing?
Doing so well. Really good seeing you, and thank you as always for having me on. It's a total joy.
Oh, it's my pleasure. David and I go back a pretty long way. I interviewed you for your debut novel, The Night.
Yeah.
No, the that was no, there was The Illuminist. The
The
Illuminist.
Luminist. Yeah. I
Hey, pretty
mean,
good.
every once in a while I'll go back and look at the publication dates and realize I'm not as fast a writer as I like to think.
You are not you
Time's gone by.
you I you know, prolific is good, but maybe not the word. I'm not saying you're not working. But in terms of the stuff we're seeing, what the world is saying, it's spaced out, but it's been a while. But okay, novel number 3,
Yes.
The Electric Love Song of Fleischl Berger. So I always thought you're a nice writer. I do feel that this book, I feel that some growth has happened here. I'm not saying this
Well,
stuff
thank
wasn't
you.
good, but
Well, thank
I
you.
do sense a growth in you as a writer. How do you feel? Is that fair?
It is fair. And it's funny, I was having this conversation with someone the other day where, we were talking a little bit about every writer's tendency to sort of live with a mental red pen, and they're never done with the
Yeah,
manuscript. There's
yeah,
always one more thing that they wish they did, or they'd correct, or you know what, I would tighten this or
sure,
expand that.
sure.
And so the question came to me, well, what about books that are already published? That must be done in your mind. And what I actually thought about that, and I said, actually way the opposite. And in some ways,
Oh,
perhaps more so when the book is published, because then theoretically you can't really touch it anymore. And
sure.
for me, it all the more reason that I would want to go back. And particularly, I think I would go back to the Luminist because from a developmental and an emotional perspective, and I'm very proud of the book, and I'm very proud of the foothold it gave me into being a published writer. So grateful to have had that experience. But I also read it and I see a writer who was working very hard to prove that he belonged.
I God, it's we just all fall for it, I think, David. I don't know how you don't. I don't know how you
Mhm.
don't, unless you
Yeah.
stumble in. I interviewed Amy Tan, and she had such a
Mm.
weird way in it that someone like basically grabbed that collection of stories that became the Joy Luck Club and just sort of almost published, like submitted it for her. I can't remember, but she had nothing to do with
Mm.
it. So
Okay.
she was
Interesting.
blissfully had no ambition, no, but most of
Yeah.
us, I think, fall into what you described there because
Yeah.
you're not on that bookshelf. You haven't done it, and it is easy to think maybe you have to be special to do it.
Mhm.
Maybe you fall.
Oh,
Just does that line up?
100%. 100%. I
Yeah,
had I had the overwhelming feeling that novel writing was what other people did who were
yeah,
qualified to do it, and it
yeah,
was beyond my ability.
yeah,
It was intimidating.
yeah.
Uh, it was a bit anxiety producing to think you need to sit down and do this. And so there was certainly some imposter syndrome around it. And
Yeah.
so when I go back and read those pages, what I would do with the first book, honestly, the story is intact, the characters are intact. I would probably take the prose down a couple of
Down a
heat
cut. That's
levels
it. Yeah, that's
because
always.
that was me saying, look at my pyrotechnics. I belong among the pantheon of published writers.
I, you know,
That's, I think, what my developmental arc has been, is just to move more into a trust in whatever power there may be in the type of writing I do and just tell a story.
yeah. But I'll tell you, it's funny. So I have another podcast called Fearless Writing with Bill Kenower. It's a little 5 or 6 minute dose of me saying, "Come on, it's going to be okay, everybody." You can
I've
do it. It's all
seen it. It's
the
awesome.
psychological challenges of writing. And the
Yeah.
last one I just put up is called The Elusive Art of Being Yourself. And I talked about my own challenge of, like, it should be so
Mhm.
simple.
Right.
Who else can you be? As
Yeah.
who was the who said that? You might as well be yourself. Everyone else is taken. The famous British humorist, gay
Was
man in
it?
the '80s who got sent to Reading
It,
jail.
it wasn't Benny Hill.
No, no, in the
No, God
1800s, in
forbid.
the
Oh,
1880s.
the 1800s.
You
Oh,
know,
was that
Ballad of Reading Jail. Help me, people. Come on.
Oscar Wilde?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Oh,
Yes.
God. Okay.
Yes.
Anyway, but I do think that is the not dressing yourself up to make yourself a little bit better than you are,
Right.
funnier than you are. But it's one of the hardest things, but it is our job, I think, as artists.
Absolutely. It's funny. I lead writing retreats.
Oh, good for you. I didn't know
including,
that. Good for you. You're probably
yeah,
really
yeah,
good. You're
yeah.
probably really
Oh,
good at
thank
that.
you. Thank you. It's something I just love doing. And
Yeah.
we did one in Grasse, which is, in the south of France just this past
Oh, how
April.
nice.
We have another one coming up in June of 25, which I'm happy to shamelessly plug because there are a couple of
Plug away,
spots still
buddy.
available.
Yeah.
If anybody who wants to reach out to me, Chamonix, France, the foot of the Alps, in full view of Mont Blanc.
Right.
It's going to be absolutely lovely. It's an intimately sized retreat for 8 or 9 people. There's a couple of spots left. Feel free to reach out to me. I would love to chat with you about it.
How
But
do they do that? How do they do that?
oh, sure. You can reach out to me on Facebook under my name, David Rocklin, Instagram, same thing. And I'll happily give my email address is
All right, people.
drocklin, Drocklin, followed by the number 2 @gmail. Would
And
love to hear from you if you're interested at all. But one of the things on the very first day of retreats, I talk a little bit about the things that we can do that stop ourselves
yeah,
and the fears, because
yeah,
there's a whole litany of fears that writers will place in front of themselves to avoid that first step forward. And one of them, which I would say is mine, and it's there before I start every new book, is I don't belong.
still.
I'm not good enough. I don't belong. Absolutely
Oh my
still.
God.
And it is about making friends with those fears because they will just be beside you. They're never going away, no matter
Yeah,
how many you do. Each new story presents to you the challenge of, are you up to the task of telling me?
yeah.
And so we talk a little bit. We make our way through that together.
That is awesome. Well, well, you may not know, but the psychological, emotional challenges of writing, that's pretty much all. Every time I will teach memoir some, but really it's the
Mhm.
psychological, emotional challenges of writing.
Right,
And
right.
one thing I've learned about fears, which are just thoughts, of course, a
Mhm.
belief, that they won't go away like you said, but I do believe they can atrophy if you don't feed them. They like, in
Right.
other words, they will come up, but if you don't indulge them, they
Mhm.
become less and less and
Yeah.
less powerful. I just think of it like my favorite stories, of course, is around Morihei Ueshiba, who was known as Oh Sensei, the founder of Aikido, which I studied, and it's all about balance. It's all about staying balanced. And I'll quickly
Mhm.
tell the story. The famous is one of his students, longtime student, like 20-year student, saw him training one day. And again, the whole point is to stay balanced. If you're off balance, you lose your power. And this student was like so floored watching Oh Sensei. And he finally went up to him after class and he said, Oh Sensei, I have trained and trained for 20 years. I am always off balance. I watch you train. You are never off balance. How do you do it? And Oh Sensei said, Oh, no, no. I am frequently off balance, very fast to get back on balance. And so instead of, my listeners can't see it, instead of wobbling left to right, you just adjust,
Mhm.
adjust, adjust. Does that make,
Right.
that to me is what the mastery is about.
So it makes beautiful sense because in addition to writing, I also came up doing combat sports. And
Ah,
so,
aha, okay.
I kind of came to think of it as when you're sparring, there is a certain point where you achieve this ability to occupy a quiet space
Yep,
within the chaos of it
yep, yep.
and take a breath and realize that you're going to emerge the other side of what's happening right now.
Yeah,
And it's okay to feel how you feel.
yep. I see now that quiet space, that is where writing occurs in my mind. You go to that
Mhm.
same stillness.
Absolutely.
Writing is a energetic movement.
Mhm.
You
Mhm.
have to be still for that to happen. Yeah.
Absolutely. And because of your background and expertise with memoir, and a lot of the folks that I work with in the retreats and one-on-one, a lot of them are working on memoir.
Yeah.
And that is maybe the most important form of all to find that quiet space
Oh,
because
yeah.
you're going to be besieged with memories you haven't wanted to look at, with worries about how people might take what you're writing,
Oh,
how
yeah.
it might affect things. Can I say this?
Oh, yeah.
So achieving that balanced, quiet space is crucial. Otherwise, you'll end up just writing sort of a very dry autobiography. I was born, I was raised, here's where I live, and the emotional content will never be seen.
Here, if as someone who does this stuff, if you have a client, students, you can share this with them. And this is what I always tell mine is they say, I don't know if I should share this. I'm worried about this. And I always say, I reassure my students by saying, the reader does not care about you. at all. They care about themselves. You are there to inspire them, entertain them, amuse them, inform them, move them, but they really care about themselves, not you. They
Yeah,
may think they do, but it's not about you. It's not, it's about them in that way. It's
it's
really
true.
so, David, it is so close to fiction. It is so razor thin close to fiction.
Oh God, yeah. Oh, absolutely. Memoir cannot be done without fictive elements.
Oh,
That is
totally. If you're writing dialogue, baby,
if you write a memoir about our conversation
that's right.
today, and let's face it, any time you spend with me is memoir worthy. Can
Of
we agree?
course, of
Can
course.
we agree?
Yes.
But if you wrote this conversation a year from now, you may be able to capture the general sensibility of what we talked about. The words you'll be making up.
All
You'll be making up what I wore. You'll be making up what our gestures were. That fictive elements exist in memoir, and in fact, embrace them. They're among the most beautiful pieces because they are you in the future sitting in that context, interpreting what this was and what it meant.
yeah.
That's the heart of memoir. Otherwise, just get a court reporter and transcribe all your conversations.
Yeah. Otherwise, I always say to my students, like, if you have, like, on your website, lovely website, by the way, you
Thank
have
you.
the about page where people then read about it. That's autobiography. That's me wanting to learn about you. Like, the
Right.
purpose of that is not memoir. Memoir.
Mhm.
So okay, listen, but you have not written memoir. You've written a beautiful novel. And so, God, every time I read a novel like this, there was just one moment early on where you describe a character picking out some food. And something seasoned with dill. I can't remember what it was. There was,
That might have been the loin seasoned with dill
yeah.
at the butcher
Okay.
shop.
Okay. That's what it was. And the reason is when I was working on fiction, this kind of shit would drive me crazy. I'm like, I need it. I have to have that. And if I'm writing about Seattle or my own life, say,
Mhm.
those details are there.
Right.
But I got it. But if I'm writing about 1880, wherever, and it's not, well, it doesn't anywhere. That those details are different then than they are now, and
Yeah.
you have to love them. You have to love finding them.
Mhm.
You have to be so
Mhm.
glad. Like, and I know that this book is not about that, but I was so admiring of that quality in it because
Oh,
I know
thank
the
you.
work. I know it. You can't just throw that down there. That takes some serious work. You have to love it, don't you? Just
You
the
do.
work of
You
finding
do.
it.
There's a line that I cross when I know it's time to start writing the book, because a lot
Uh,
of writers will ask the question about how much research is too much. Am I
yeah, yeah.
getting into just analysis paralysis? Am I over researching? I really need to start already. And so that line is different for everyone. For me, it's when the story and the setting and the details and the clothes and the food and the transportation and how the day was spent and the work, when those things don't feel like story elements I am cobbling together in a made up
Um,
way, they feel like memories of things that happened to me. When I'm that acquainted with it,
with
it's
the
time to start writing.
yeah,
And
but
part of that acquaintanceship is getting into those details. What would they have eaten? What might it have looked
yeah,
like,
what do you
smelled like,
wear and
felt
what
like? Mhm.
so
Yeah,
much of the
yeah, yeah,
details
yeah.
like you need and to not feel like and not show off and not just
Right.
say look at this detail I can look at that little
Yeah, yeah.
chunk.
We've all run into those paragraphs. They're usually the ones we skip,
Yeah,
where you can tell that, okay, this was a dump of
yeah,
the research to show
yeah.
that, like he went outside and looked around. The Vietnam War was raging, and everybody, yeah, it's like,
That's
okay, I
right.
get it. You did your research, you understand the socioeconomic climate
Right.
against which the story is
Yeah.
placed. But, very few of us in our real lives walk outside and say, it's a lovely day. The Trump-Harris election process is going smooth.
No,
No.
no.
So there's a little bell that goes off for a lot of us that says, nope, that's expository. You don't need that. Be fully immersed in it and trust that it's going to come out in your prose without having to put the whole, like, let me make sure I get this research that I spent weeks
You're
on
like,
into
man,
the
I found
paragraph.
this detail. There's no way on God's green earth I'm not sticking this in this
Right,
novel.
right. I need the tax write-off. I took a
That's
whole trip
right.
for this.
Um, so this is always interesting to me because for me, I'm not, and of course I write memoir, so outline maybe not so necessary. But even when I was writing fiction, and I wrote a lot of fiction, I
Mhm,
wouldn't outline. I couldn't do it. And
mhm.
I knew, like, I could never do character outlines. I would just need to let them start talking, and then I would see
Right.
what they were. That's really how I operate. So I'm always like, so when I did I did one book that was really historical. So I kind of just wrote it, and then went back and said, although the research then changed the book a little bit. But my
Definitely.
question to you, so that there's the balance of discovery, and I don't know
Mhm.
how to discover for myself unless I'm there sentence to sentence, seeing the characters move around and talk. But this book is so immersed in the historical setting. You have to do some writing before the research, don't you, to say what it is you're actually writing about, or do you just get an
Oh, yeah.
idea and then start your research?
So every book I've written so far has kind of started in a similar way. They start with a little kernel of a
Right.
fact
A
that I
fact.
find out that I just find
Oh,
interesting. Yeah,
okay.
and it's usually something extremely small.
Right.
Like for example, if my next novel was going to start, if the jumping off point is what I see on the screen behind you, I'm not going to kind of describe the entire screen. I
Right.
might zero in on one string on your guitar,
Right.
something small.
Right.
And then from there, there's usually some sort of visual stimulation, an old photo, an
Mm,
archive of a painting or something, and the two of them collide, and the spark becomes the story. So it's how the
oh,
Luminous started. It's how the Luminous started with a visit to the Getty Museum.
right. Yeah, I
And
think
then
we talked about that. Yeah.
and then in the archives of all the photographs I looked at, there was one that became the starting point for the night language.
Sure.
This new one, the Electric Love Song of Fleischl Berger, actually started because I followed a footnote in an article and went straight down a rabbit hole and became absolutely fascinated. For whatever reason, I was just doing some reading on near-death experiences
Yeah.
because it's just interesting.
Oh,
Uh,
I
yeah,
interviewed a whole rash of people who had them and wrote books about them, and it
yeah.
is I
Oh, yeah.
I am
Some
all in on that. I find it
the
fascinating.
ones that you can't explain.
Oh, and
And
there's a bunch of them.
this was a case study about a woman from the early 1990s, I believe, who had a brain hemorrhage
Yeah.
and was very close to death. And
Yeah.
in order to operate on her, they had to take her brain activity
Yeah.
baseline to zero.
Yep.
So they used surgical glue to keep her eyes closed. They
Yeah.
put noise canceling headphones on her so there was no auditory input because even while you're under anesthesia, your brain is
Sure.
registering
Sure.
input. Nothing,
Yeah.
absolutely nothing. And
And
when
yet,
she woke, she told them the instruments in the
yeah.
operating room that
Yeah.
they were using and the time on the clock.
Yes.
And their
Yes.
first thought, which of course struck me as very funny, was, oh my God, she wasn't all the way under. We're going to get our asses
Oh.
sued off. But there was a footnote
Okay.
because right at the sentence that talked about her being attached to the electroencephalogram so they could monitor brain activity and figure out where in her brain this injury had taken place.
Right.
And the footnote said the electroencephalogram is popularly credited in terms of its invention to a German psychiatrist named Hans Berger, who, in the early 1920s, who accidentally invented it because he had his own near-death experience. And I'm like, well, I've got to follow this. I
See,
have to see
this
what
is
this is.
this is you know what? That's so funny. I was mentioning that novel. Now that I think about it, it started
Mhm.
because I saw my family tree on one side of my
Mm.
family
Mhm.
going back to like 1800.
Right.
One and my great whatever grandmother had like 12 kids, and I noticed she died the same year as her last kid. And I thought, oh, I'll bet you anything she died during childbirth. And I just pictured this huge family, and I thought, and then I started. That was all. That
Yep.
was just
That's all it takes.
that's all it takes. Yeah.
That's all it takes. Writers are always standing on the precipice of something, and it just takes a little poke
Yeah.
on the shoulder to just send them tumbling over. And that's exactly what happened to me. So it was just the imagery of this person having its near-death experience,
Yeah.
which in the book is based upon his, but heavily fictionalized.
Sure.
Um, and the notion that the EEG was essentially just a happy accident. It's kind of a byproduct of this white whale that he spent his entire life chasing,
Yeah.
which was, did this really happen? Why did it happen? How did it happen? And so his entire life, essentially, at least as I've visualized it, was the consequence of, a seemingly impossible journey. which just immediately attracted me.
Well, of course, the novelist, if you aren't drawn to curiosity and discovery that's your whole life. It's not,
Mhm.
it's funny. I've been writing about it a lot lately, which is that you have to be in a state of not knowing
Mhm.
in order to discover. There is
Right.
no discovery unless you have to accept the not knowing it. You and I, we're not young men anymore. I can
Wait a
speak for
minute. Wait,
myself anyway.
whoa, whoa. This took a dark turn. I was not ready.
We are not children. And we
Truth.
sometimes, grown-ups,
Mhm.
fancy themselves as knowing some stuff,
Right.
and that's fine. You got to know some stuff in order to get around in the world. You
Mhm.
were a lawyer once upon a time, maybe still
Still.
some stuff if you're a lawyer, right?
Yeah, yeah. Well, and every attorney knows the first thing you should always admit if it's true is I don't know. I'll do a little research. I'll take a look at this, but I do not know the answer off the top of
Ooh,
my head.
I did not, that's interesting. Maybe part of the reason so many lawyers are writers, part of the reason
Mhm.
is that they're
That's
willing
right,
to when they
because
don't know
we
something.
enjoy the process of discovering.
And there is a whole part of the law called discovery. Is
Indeed.
there?
Oh, well done.
Huh?
That's a that. Hey, kids at home, that's called a thematic circle.
That's
If
right.
you're marking your bingo card at home.
Yeah, so yeah, but I really like curiosity and discovery. I just feel are the engines of
Yeah.
creativity. And I
Yeah.
for me, part of the reason is that curiosity, I think, is unique. Your curiosity, the fact that you got interested in that footnote, a million people could read that and not get interested in that footnote. And
Right.
it's your unique, like, oh, now there's something there that
Yeah.
sort of that draws you along. And I feel like that is the magic of being human and of being
Mhm.
creative,
Yeah.
listen and of being willing to listen to it. I think that's so
Yeah. Absolutely. And I tell the writers that I work with, some variation of my very, very deeply held sentiment that I believe in writing the way other people believe in God.
I like it.
In that I believe that there are times when you become connected to something which is not of you, but is for you.
Yeah,
And so, every single day we're bombarded with sensory input. We see
sure.
things and we're like, oh, that's pretty cool. I could do something with that, or we hear things and you're like, that's really cool. I want to remember that.
Right.
And there's so many of them. And I know a lot of writers, we have this worry, this constant gnawing doubt that, oh my God, I'm going to have an idea. It's going to come to me in my sleep and I'm not going to write it down. I'm going to forget it.
Uh,
Yeah. And what I tend to believe is that I call it the flypaper rule, which is another thing that kind of marks my age. The
yes.
dangling strips that flies fly
Yeah.
into and they get stuck. So these ideas come, but most of them leave. And the reason for that is because they're not supposed to stay.
Yeah,
And don't spend your time and energy worrying about them.
that's right.
The ones that are supposed to find you, that are supposed to stay with you until you do something with them, they're going to stay whether you like it or not. They're going to bother
Exactly.
you. They're going to
Yes.
bug you.
Yeah.
48 hours later, a week later, you're going to be like, why am I still thinking about Hans Berger
Right.
and a footnote? Like, the thought should be at that moment, I think I need to do something with this. And that's when probably your initial bout of research begins, because this idea won't leave you alone. And I also tell people, when they come and we're working on something or we're just chit-chatting, I tell them whatever story it is that you're working on, it does not matter how many times I've been published. It makes no difference at all because I could not do what you're doing. I could not make that
No,
story what you
no,
could make it. I could not write it as well. I could not write it as beautifully or as completely or in as deeply a felt way. And the simple reason is because that story didn't come find me. It came to find
that's right.
you. There's a
That's right.
reason why it came to find you. And you got to trust in that. If it came to you and it stayed there, that's you got to open the door and let it in. If you're a writer, you have no choice.
Boy, you are speaking my language. It's so true. It is so true. And I think that that's why you have to, feedback is okay and
Mhm.
good editor is nice, but
Mhm.
at the end of the day, the editor can't write it for you. Like you have to go. I work with clients, and I know you do too. And I'm trying to teach them to fish. I don't want them. I don't want to give them that fish. And
Mhm.
I don't. And it's tough. I'm like, don't. I know it's hard because I'm is the professional coach, but don't try to please me. Don't
Right.
write to please me. I know you
Right.
want my praise, but that cannot be why you're doing this.
Yeah, that's not the be all end all
But
of
it's
this.
tough
And
because it's nice to
it
hear people
is.
say that's good.
Oh, I was just speaking with somebody the other day, and it was a great reminder of how, we as writers, we may have beta readers or like a
Yeah.
workshop or something, and we've all had the experience of 10 people giving us 10 different pieces of feedback. You need to fix this. No, that worked actually, but fix this. I like that character. I hate that character. And you come out of it going, I don't know what to do. The same is true with a lot of positive praise
Yeah.
because we're only human. We find ourselves wanting to rewrite to chase the praise. I want the whole piece to be as praiseworthy as the
Yes.
section you
Yeah.
you read. Both of those, negative feedback, positive feedback, can certainly involve the risk of pulling you away from the thing that made you stay up at night saying, I have to write this. The thing that made you bleed all over the page to get that story down. You can't lose sight of that. That's home base for you.
Yeah.
That's what you should keep coming back to.
The rest is really nothing. Like George
Yeah.
O'Keeffe said, I decided for myself, and praise and criticism went down the same drain, and I was free. And I'm like,
Love.
it's totally true, because
Yeah.
you can't live for it, man. You live
Yeah.
by the sword, you die by the sword. If it matters that people
100%.
love it, then it has to matter when they
100%.
hate it.
Of course it's shiny, of course it's
Yeah.
addictive, but at the end of the day, it's not why you started writing. Even though you think you started because you want people to say you're an amazing writer,
Yeah.
that's not really why you started. Behind that is I started because I have to tell this story. I don't want to tell the story. I have to tell this story. That's why you started.
And also, I think that within us all, this came from me working with clients or students who felt like they didn't know what to do. These
Mhm.
are always grown people. And it struck me that we all have a personal aesthetic, whether we acknowledge it or not, that we are working with all the time in the books we read and the music we
Mhm.
listen to and the paint
Mhm.
on the wall, or the
Yeah,
fact that you're leaving that image there on the walls, right? That's a personal aesthetic. And the fact that to think that that is not active while you are writing,
100%.
and so we are trying to satisfy ourselves. We
Mhm.
are the art critic that we are trying to satisfy. We don't acknowledge it, maybe, or we can't. But in the end, it's like, and what's tricky, David, is we read our books. Let's say you're writing a book length thing, and the question I'm always asking myself is this it? Is this it? Is this it being is this? And in terms of the whole book, the answer is going to be no for a
Mhm.
long.
Right.
This sentence, this paragraph, this scene,
Mhm.
yes, but
Absolutely.
there'll be a big no, 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 and you have to love that no,
Mhm.
right? You've got to love it because it's
Yeah.
going to be no, 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 no until it's finally yes.
And what an extraordinary gift any kind of artist can give themselves. Whether you're trying to write a song, trying to paint something, trying to write a book of any kind, what an amazing gift of grace and patience you
Yeah,
give yourself when you say, I'm beginning this. I am a long way away from this being perfect. I may never be there because who the hell can say what perfect means? But in terms of it being good or ready or the way it sounds or looks when I think of it in my head, it's a long time between here and there. And that time means I don't have the pressure of being perfect right now. This next sentence doesn't have to be quote unquote the right one. It just needs to get me to the one after that. So that pressure hopefully lifts a little bit.
yeah, and perfect anyway. I'm telling you, when people talk about perfect, it's really what other people will think of it. It's really
Yeah.
that is all that is, and I always
Yeah.
say that if you can read a sentence you wrote and honestly say, I like that. That works for me. And
Yep.
that be it. That, my friends, is self-acceptance. It is that simple. You have
Yep.
accepted yourself because you said, I don't like it because I simply like it because I like it. And you are practicing self-acceptance, I think, with every single sentence you put down there.
Absolutely. I mean, how- everything's going to change. Everything's going to be
Yes.
chipped and
Yeah.
carved and
Yeah.
reshaped. For
Yeah.
the moment, don't save it. Don't set it aside. Say it all. Say everything. Play
Yeah.
everything. Paint everything.
Yeah. Yeah.
Then, when it's all there and you can kind of see it in one great big lumpy pile, you can say, okay, now what, as I was writing it, felt imperative to keep, and what felt like, oh, maybe I should say something. And it's a great way to enter the revision stage.
Every time I put something down and I go, yeah, that's good enough. that is the piece that if I show it to my agent or I ask one person to read it, they go, I don't know, that chapter. I'm always like, oh, I knew
Oh
it.
yeah.
I knew I
Yeah.
didn't love it, but I left it there because I didn't know what else to do with it. Always,
Mhm.
always. I don't.
Yeah, yeah. And we all have that little tuning fork inside us. You know when the note rings true, and you know
Gotta
when it's a
listen to
little
it,
bit
man. You've
forced, but
got to listen
you
to
got
it.
to listen to it. I mean, you may have fallen in love with that sentence. You're like, I have to put that
Yeah.
sentence in. It's beautiful. That's cool, but its beauty is usually not a good reason to put it in. It needs to serve a purpose, advance something.
Yeah.
And when I'm looking at folks' manuscripts because they're coming to a retreat or we're just
Right.
working together, what I tell them is the issues that you may feel you're having, whether it's a block, whether it's this character is just not turning out the way I thought, whether it's those inevitable moments where it's like, I just can't bring myself to go past this. The answer is always already in the pages.
Yep.
It's just you're very close to it, so it's hard to see. But
Yep.
I'm going to tell you that I'm going to read the pages you've done, and it's going to be glowing. And
Right.
I will circle it because it's already there. It's
Yeah.
already there. And then it's just a question of finding it and seeing how the story flows from it.
That is so interesting. And I think totally true that it is kind of always there, but you get all twisted up and you can't see
Yeah.
it.
Oh
No,
yeah. Oh yeah.
we get it.
You get engaged in the struggle between where the character or you, if it's memoir, naturally wants to take the story based upon development and where you thought it was supposed to be. So you're trying to shove it in that direction because it's like, oh my God, but if you don't go to New York on that
Yeah, that's
night,
right. You're
my
right.
whole story just
Yeah,
and
that's
you're
right.
like, and therefore, then I guess your whole story changed. But that's hard to hear sometimes. You need to get used to that idea.
Totally. Totally. Well, David, I knew I'd have fun talking to you again. Again. So we could, if you look at David's a beautiful writer, it's got a book coming out in November. Is it like November 5th or when it?
November 15th.
Okay. So after the election. So, okay. So
We'll all
we will
be,
not speak
hey
of it.
man, all I'm gonna say is, hey everybody, take a collective breath. Think we're gonna be okay.
I think so too. I think so
Yeah,
too. I think we're going to be okay.
I think
I had
so.
that feeling. I've had that feeling before, and I didn't know why, and now I have even stronger.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
the Electric Love Song of Fleischl Berger, beautiful. Check it out.
Thank you.
Also, David, as you mentioned, book coach. I've never worked with him as a book coach. I suspect he's very good. So,
Thank you.
if you want one, even though I do it too, listen, we're all out there. There's plenty of us. Look him
I'll
up.
refer you to Bill.
Refer me for all the people who are in the deepest, darkest despair. I'm their lifeline. But anyway, I'm sure David can help you with that too. But anyway, look him up. He's fabulous. But David, I'm not quite through with you. As always, I bet this question, you've answered it a couple of times, but sometimes our answers evolve as we do. And so my question to you is, if writing has taught you anything about life, about being a person, it's taught you what?
Ooh, interesting. Here's what it has taught me. It has taught me empathy.
Good answer.
Empathy, empathy, empathy. Even if you're writing a character who's difficult, even if you're living with someone who's difficult, even if you're telling a story that's challenging, even if your own life has been challenging, you need to give yourself and others the gift of empathy. And when I think of empathy, I think about it in a writerly way, and it's based upon how I write, which is there is a moment, whether it's in your life, in that person's life, or in the life of your story, your characters, that has come and gone. It's lost. It no longer can be seen readily, and people may not even know it ever happened. If you take the time to go excavate it and shine a light on it, and even celebrate it a little, because in that moment it mattered, it existed, you're going to see them differently, and you're going to see your story differently. It's from that place that all my stories begin, with a desire to excavate a moment or a person that is long lost, forgotten, and in a way, perhaps write them the life that they never got to have. And in our own life, excavating our own moments and recognizing that happened, that mattered. Now go take a look at them again, whether that the them there is you or someone else. You've just changed your context. And to me, all writing is contextual. where you know, if you are writing and it took you a month, where you are as a human being at the end of the month is in a different place from where you were when you started. And that's why when you go back and read it, you feel differently because you're different.
Yeah.
So empathy can change the context through which you see people, through which you see yourself, and through which you see your stories. And that is to be embraced. And I think that by definition, it causes you to look for the good, to look for the kind, and to look for why that's important too. And to, celebrate those small importances. So that's what I think my main lesson would be.